Spring is supposed to start in how many days? I think we're about 2 weeks away from spring. When I hear March, I think spring. Do you have snow on the ground there, wherever you are? Is there snow on the ground? I know that there was some kind of northeaster that came through the Northeast and much of the Midwest as well. So snow on the ground here for one of the few times this winter. We haven't seen that much snow for the Midwest, for Ohio, but we do have snow on the ground courtesy last night's snowfall. So doesn't feel like spring, doesn't look like spring. It's not spring, but we're getting there. There is spring football, though. They play spring football in the winter at places like Michigan and Auburn in particular, because we've got a Michigan spring game in just a couple weeks on April 1st. And this, of course, an SEC show. So sorry, SEC fans, for bringing up a Big Ten team first and foremost. I will not let that mistake ever happen again. But Auburn would be the first team, I believe, out of the SEC. No. Let me check that. This Saturday, the Missouri Tigers host their spring game. Missouri, this Saturday, March 18th. I've got all the spring dates in front of me. I thought Auburn was the first on April 8th. They are an early one, but man, Mizzou jumped the gun. And they've done this in recent years. Maybe this is an Eli Drinkwitz thing that he likes to get spring practice over with quickly. So those Missouri Tiger players that are considering the transfer portal, they're going to have more time to think about it. I believe the transfer portal opens on May 1st. You're going to see players announce before May 1st that they're entering the transfer portal. We see that players will say, hey, I'm going to be entering the transfer portal, and they will announce that on social media. But I believe the first day of the transfer portal is coming up on May 1st. But the Mizzou spring game coming up March 18th at noon Eastern time. I would think that that's going to be on the SEC network, because it's going to be March Madness. It's going to be basketball on the other channels. I can't imagine that they're going to have anything else besides softball and baseball to show. But I will have to check on that. We've got other dates coming in. Kentucky does not have a spring game. They've already started spring practice. Florida has started spring practice on March 4th. So they've been at it for almost 10 days. And that's on April 13th. So Florida goes at it for spring game on Thursday night, April 13th. So a Thursday night game that we can cover here at the Voice of College Football. So we'll be here for that on a Thursday night. I'll look forward to that. Kind of a change of pace, Thursday night spring game. Mississippi State on the 15th, LSU on the 22nd, Arkansas on the 15th, Georgia on the 15th. We got a busy day. We are going to have a busy, jam-packed day on April 15th covering all these spring games. Georgia, Arkansas, Mississippi State, South Carolina on the 15th, Tennessee on the 15th, Texas A&M, and Ole Miss on the 15th, Bama on April 22nd. So Mizzou this Saturday, Auburn on the 8th, that slew of teams on the 15th, almost everybody in the SEC on the 15th, and then Bama on the 22nd. Please call the show. I've left a link there in the comments section. Join the show if you want to talk SEC football. Got a note here as I receive these SEC notes on a daily basis. So I'm going through the most recent SEC notes that, so basically attendance in college football has been waning in recent years. However, there was an increase in the SEC. Well, of course, there was an increase in 2021 because that was coming off of 2020, the pandemic. So everybody was going to increase big in 2021. In 2022, there was another uptick in attendance in the SEC. Went up to 41,800 per game. No, that's on the level. 41,800 per game. That's a 5% increase from the previous season. The SEC also had an increase. I'm still trying to track those numbers, but the SEC did have an attendance increase and led the country in attendance for the 24th consecutive year. I mentioned Auburn. I mentioned now that Mizzou is teeing it up this Saturday, that Auburn will be the next one up, and they will have April 8th all to themselves concerning the SEC and spring games. We got Kyle Loomis on the line to talk some Auburn football. You can catch Kyle and the rest of the gang there at E2C Network. Hey, Kyle.
Hey, how's it going today? Happy spring football, because I think everybody's going now, right? Everybody's at least started some process of it.
Everybody's up and running. Absolutely.
I'm super excited about it for Auburn fans because obviously we've already been started for 1 week. The odd thing is that we had this spring break week happen right after the first week. So there's really not been a ton of solid information to really dive deep into. There's rumors, there's thoughts, there's speculation. We can talk about some of those things, but right now we're kind of still sitting in that lull of there's not a lot of stuff circulating out of the spring camp solid wise to really like latch ourselves onto, just the anticipation of what's coming up, as you said, on April 8th. And I think it's going to be a big showing at the spring game for Auburn when that date arrives.
I used to think, Kyle, that it was odd that these teams would take breaks in the middle of spring practice because I don't think it was that common years ago. And now more and more and more and more. And I think it's more the rule than the exception.
Right.
And I don't know if it just becomes a matter of the calendar just gives us no opportunity to do it any other way, or that the coaches actually think, I think the more that we understand about the work ethic and the work psychology of humans is that we work in spurts. We can't expect ourselves to work for 10 and 12 hours and keep that kind of focus and drive and energy. It's good to work in spurts, take a rest, another spurt, that it's better to take a sprint. So maybe it's better to take a sprint at spring practice, really get locked in, focused for a week, go hard at it, take a break, come back again, go at it again, and be laser focused after a bit of a rest.
Yeah, I think there's some of that at play, but I think we can't ignore that there's been a culture shift as well, just in society at large. Some of us long for the days of the blue collar mentality of we're just going to power through this. We're not going to complain. Everybody's just going to suck it up, buttercup, and keep pushing forward. I think there's a balance that you can strike between both of those mentalities. I would love to see us, I went through 2-a-days, obviously, as a football player myself in high school, and sometimes 3-a-days. I think it's very rare that you see those anymore. So, yeah, some of it is rules. Some of it is just scheduling. Some of it is understanding the mental, capacity for, like you said, in terms of when we can stay laser focused. Is a sprint better rather than a marathon? I think all of those things are at play. It makes it extended out a little bit longer now, I feel like, whereas maybe spring practice was a little bit shorter in terms of number of weeks. Now we're stretching a month and a half almost for Auburn football discussions, which I love. Obviously, it's more time to talk about Auburn football, but it does feel like it's kind of stretched out a little bit to me now.
And I do believe that May 1st is the first day of the transfer portal. But as we've experienced now through these various transfer portal cycles, there will be athletes that will get out ahead of that, and they will announce, even though they can't enter the transfer portal officially, that they will say, I am entering the transfer portal. So with an April 8th spring game, that gives Auburn fans a little bit more time to possibly be concerned, worry, stew about those players who may announce after the end of spring practice that they're entering the transfer portal before there's going to be as many players from the other side, from outside of the Auburn campus, that are potential candidates to join the Auburn football team.
Right. And I don't think there's so much worry going on the side of Auburn fans right now in terms of people transferring out. Not that we don't value all the athletes that are here and want them to stay and want us to find success with who we have. I think because we are at such a ground zero level with a coaching change, a regime change right now, it really is just kind of one of those things where what's wrong with some more change at this point. When you think about transfers, especially leaving, there's always been the speculation that TJ Finley, starting quarterback for part of the year last year, might transfer out after he finished his spring obligations academic wise. So that's still out there. I will tell you that there's at least some talk that he's been kind of lighting it up in spring camp so far. Again, it's only been one official week and one extra day of practice counting yesterday, but I'm starting to see a lot of people bring that up. Is TJ going to be able to really compete for this starting job? I don't think it's a question, can he compete? It was just maybe a question of, does he want to be here? And maybe this fresh perspective, maybe this regime change is kind of reignited, not just for him, but a lot of other players. So for me, I think that's the big one out there. We're going to lose some players because people are going to find they have less of an opportunity than they thought they were going to have. But at the same time, I'm personally not worried so much about who's leaving. It's more of the excitement of what could we gain in the transfer portal, if that makes sense.
Kyle, what can you tell us about Philip Montgomery and what we can expect out of a Philip Montgomery offense?
Your question, that's a good question. And I wish I had a better answer for you on this one. I have not dove deep into what Philip Montgomery or Ron Roberts, the defensive coordinator, will do. I've heard wild variations on what it will look like. I do know this, that Auburn football is at its best, no matter who the coach is, no matter who the offensive coordinator is, when they put an emphasis on their run game. And when you look at the running backs that we have, even without Tank Bigsby, and by the way, did you see how much he lit it up at the NFL Combine? Just an absolute beast of a man, if anybody ever was questioning that. But Jarquez Hunter, Damari Alston, you're bringing in Jeremiah Cobb, one of the best running back commits and signees now that Auburn's had in probably since Tank Bigsby, just in terms of speculation, right? Jarquez Hunter has, outperformed those speculations and expectations. But the backfield is just primed and ready for Auburn to return to that hard-nosed just identity that we've had in the running game. So my hope for Philip Montgomery is whatever he chooses, that is going to be at its core, because that's what Auburn fans just seem to latch on to. And obviously you don't want to be stuck in your ways, right? You need to be variable. We saw Brian Harsin and his various offensive coordinators, and I mean various because we had several of them, switch things up from time to time. You've got to go with what's flowing. And I do think Hugh Freeze, who is turning the reins over to Philip Montgomery, is going to give him that freedom to do so. But you know that we're going to have a little bit of flair in there. You've seen the Hugh Freeze offenses in the past.
Phil Montgomery, most notably head coach on the Group of 5 level. You addressed Robbie Ashford. So how much of Auburn Nation is satisfied with thinking that he is going to be the starting quarterback? Completed 49% of his passes. We've discussed a number of times with you the benefits and the limitations at this point. At least there's a lot of growth to be had as a passer, but the level of contentment going forward that he could once again be the guy.
Yeah, when I talk to people just out and about, there's a lot of, do you think we're going to get this guy in the transfer portal, as opposed to, oh, I'm excited about Robbie, if we're just talking about Robbie in this conversation. And I think that some of that's natural. The grass is always greener on the other side type of mentality. Everybody's trying to look for, what's the next biggest and best thing. And we tend to kind of overlook things. Bo Nix had a problem with that a lot, the people kind of overlooking maybe what we had, not saying he was the best out there, but we probably were a little bit better off with him remaining at Auburn if that could have happened. So for Robbie, as you've heard me say 1,000 times here, I'm really trying to encourage Auburn fans to get on board with him for now being considered the starter and letting us grow with him. Now, that doesn't mean that there's not going to be someone that comes in. That doesn't mean that TJ is not going to win the job and stay at Auburn. Doesn't mean that this, quarterback in Holden Gerner, who's behind him, even a Hank Brown, might make some waves, who came in with Hugh Freeze. There's a lot of options there, but I would say right now, when you talk to the general public, the question more so is, who are we going to get, rather than what do you think about Robbie? And that makes me a little sad for him, because I think he did a lot of things for us in a very tumultuous year that probably nobody else could have done, considering how our offensive line played. So I think we might need to appreciate Robbie a little bit more.
So regardless of what happens in any other sports, in particular men's basketball, is Auburn always a football school, or is that basketball team really vying for the affections of the Auburn sports fan?
I would argue this year we were more of a basketball school until the basketball team underperformed a little bit. And then there was some, we'll say some frustrations there as well. We pitch this, every bit of marketing we can. I do myself, and we mean it. We're an everything school. We love everything about Auburn. And so we will dive headlong into it. The proof really is in things in professional sports for Auburn. If you look at what will happen, or even just, maybe collegiate events such as the NCAA March Madness. Look at the ticket prices for the session that Auburn is in versus some of the other schools out there. Now, granted, it's because we got the Birmingham Regional. That's obvious. But in professional sports, Jabari Smith, Walker Kessler, you got Auburn fans tuning in nightly to watch him play. That's a demographic centralizing from, the Southeast that some of these teams that they play for probably never had. There's a reason that when we say we're an everything school, we mean it. Auburn football will always be king. It will drive what our mood is. And if then basketball fails, then our mood will probably be even more sour. But we do try to live by us trying to be an everything school.
Kyle Loomis, E2C Network. It's everything Auburn, meaning it's not just football. It's just not men's basketball. It's women's basketball. It's baseball. Baseball is huge at Auburn. I know that from being down there for 7 years in the SEC, covering SEC baseball. It's unlike anywhere else in the country. Track everything that they do connected to Auburn University. They're on E2C Network. Kyle, appreciate you stopping by.
As always, I appreciate you having me, and hopefully we'll have a lot more to talk about next week with spring practice getting a little further underway.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Kyle.
War Eagle.
Kyle Loomis, E2C Network. We're going to continue on our SEC path and move it on to a school that used to have a pretty good series with Auburn a long, long time ago before they split divisions and were taken out of the mix except for that rotation. And that, of course, the Florida Gators. We got David Waters here from Gators Breakdown. If you're not familiar, Gators Breakdown, folks. If you want to track Florida, keep up with the SEC, keep up with the national landscape as it's connected to Florida. Got to get on over there. Dave, appreciate you stopping by.
Yeah, problem. No problem, Mark. Thanks for having me.
Well, I'm going to leave it wide open. I'm looking at a few things here concerning Florida that I will pinpoint here in just a second. But what's hot in recruiting? We can start there.
Not much, Mark. As far as recruiting goes, kind of quiet on that. They've had their two biggest commits on campus the last couple of weeks. DJ Lagway 2 weeks ago, the 24 quarterback commit, of course, and then Miles Graham on campus this past weekend. That's their two of their biggest commits there in the class of 24, the quarterback and one of their linebackers that they have in the class. So still trying to go through the water on that. The most interesting storyline there, Mark, is Florida still looking for their wide receiver coach. Of course, Kerry Colbert goes on to the NFL, and they still have not made that hire yet. So they're hosting. It was more a couple of weeks ago. They hosted a couple of wide receivers there, but without a wide receiver coach. Of course, in spring practice, you're hosting recruits. So you thought this wide receiver coach hire would probably be made by now, but it is not. So that's probably the more interesting storyline as far as recruiting goes, is not having your wide receiver coach when you are hosting recruits right now.
David, are you content? Is the fan base content with the hiring of Austin Armstrong to head up the defense?
Yeah, Mark, they absolutely are. Very young, of course, so you got to get past that. But, of course, once you kind of put together he's not green. He has called Southern Miss's defense the last couple of years. Was on, a coffee break at Alabama there when he was hired as the inside linebackers coach and thought to be, quote unquote, Mark, the kind of defensive coordinator in waiting with that hire there with Kevin Steele coming over from Miami. How much longer is he going to be there? How much longer is he going to coach? Of course, he's just getting hired, but he's kind of a journeyman defensive coordinator throughout his career, but also up there in age. So would he be there at Alabama for a while? And he's kind of in that. He's also why Gator fans kind of like it. He has been with Billy Napier for a while. He was part of that Louisiana staff. with Billy Napier. They sent him to Georgia for a year to learn under Kirby and that defensive staff. He came back to Louisiana. So there's a familiarity with him as well. And Mark is almost like hiring within staff because of the familiarity. He's not going to come in and change the defense a whole lot from what Patrick Toney did. Now, tendencies and how he'll call a game would change, but the defense, the base of the defense, a lot of the terminology is the same. So it's not like he's coming in and cleaning house. He's also with the same defensive staff that was with Florida last year at the same time. So, he's really the only change, and it's pretty much the same defense. And he's really highly regarded in that Billy Napier, Kirby Smart, Nick Saban little circle that they have. So I think even though he's young, Mark, he's called plays before. He's got the right background as far as the coaching circles that he's been involved with, and just the attitude change. I mean, he's a little more hype. He's a little more energetic when you see him out there. He actually talked to the media for the first time this past weekend. And the quote that got, sold Gator Nation, is talking season, Mark. That's kind of what spring practice is right now. We'll see. It'll all come down to what he does on the field, of course. But, he's like, the approach on defense is, we negotiate with a hammer. So that kind of lets you know the aggressiveness that he's going to come along with this Florida Gator defense with.
And when you say young, I think 29 is what I heard. 29 years old. Yeah. Dave, I think when your average college football fan thinks of Florida football, they connect it to Urban Meyer, Tim Tebow. That's the twosome that you think there. And then you think maybe even beyond that, fun and gun, Steve Spurrier. So it's all offense. But when I think Florida football and I think the Gators at their best, even as recently as Will Muschamp, for all his detractors, that's when Florida was playing Florida defense. That's the last time the Gators had, okay, this is a top 5 unit in the country. Some of the McElwain defenses were pretty decent too, as leftovers from Muschamp. Are we a long ways away from seeing that again?
Yeah, Mark, we're a long way from that. Can this Florida defense be better? Yes. It's been since 2019 that you'd even say they'd have a comparable, 2019, Mark, I guess you could say good defense, but they still failed to show up in the big games. And look, don't get me wrong, nobody was stopping LSU in 2019, but that game they didn't show up. They didn't show up the Georgia game that year either. And two of the biggest games that year, you were still waiting for the defense to kind of break through in Todd Grantham's second year. Now, games besides that, they were okay. You could nitpick, but you would have taken 2019 defense last year for Florida just to get you to 7-8 wins probably with just a better defense. And you go to that 2020 season, Mark, and whatever happened, whether it was COVID and it messing up the season and delaying the season and development maybe getting thrown out the window because of that, whatever happened in that 2020 season, Florida's defense just hasn't been the same. No matter who's calling the plays, no matter who's been lining up on the field, it's been guys playing out of position. It's been not recruiting very well on that side of the ball. So there's been a lot to fix on that side of the ball. It's more than just a defensive coordinator there for Florida. But Mark, when you look at talent, the depth isn't there to be a Will Muschamp, as you said, Jeff Collins defense. When you want to take a look at that, in those defense, when McElwain was there, he was a defensive coordinator. Yeah, they're a long way from that. They don't have the depth. They're starting to get better depth up front due to some transfers. Cam Jackson coming from Memphis, Caleb Banks coming from Louisville, and also just the development in that area. Des Watson, Chris McClellan are names I think you can point to now that you feel pretty comfortable with. So they lose a star like Jervon Dexter, but they may actually be deeper this year. They may not have the ceiling. And Jervon Dexter played entirely way too many snaps last year. As I said, he played and kind of out of position too for what he should be playing up front on the defense. And there's no depth. He was sitting there playing 60 snaps a game. And in the SEC, and you're a defensive lineman, playing 60 snaps a game is just entirely way too much. But he had to. Florida just didn't have a lot of depth there. And then they had to hit the transfer portal for linebackers as well. Taraja Mitchell comes over from Ohio State. Deuce Spurlock comes over from Michigan. They bring back Derek Wingo. They bring back Shamar James, who was all SEC freshman. So maybe even deeper there a bit too. Mark, the biggest questions in the secondary. They got two safeties there with Miguel Mitchell, Kamari Wilson leading the charge there, but not a lot of depth behind those guys. You probably have, of course, Jason Marshall at your first cornerback spot, but who plays that second cornerback spot opposite of him? Is it Moore, the freshman that came in last year? He got hurt. And when he got hurt, you had the return of Jaden Hill, who was bouncing back from injury as well. So, Devin Moore, Jaden Hill, that second cornerback spot. But really interesting, Mark, is, without the depth there on that secondary for the Gators, Jaden Hill kind of cross-training, playing a little bit of star this spring as well. So Florida trying to find some depth pieces and probably be trying to find ways to get their best 5 on the field, and it's starting in that secondary.
David Waters, Gators Breakdown. Get on over there. It's right here on YouTube. It's also on your favorite audio platform and one of the top audio podcasts in all of college football. Jamarcus Weston moving from offense to defense. Is that just a depth move, or is he expected, like, this dude's an athlete, he might be able to go over there and make plays?
Both, Mark. Hill actually spoke on that this past week and did say, Jamarcus Weston was recruited as a wide receiver. Could never really break through. Dan Mullen always talked him up and being one of the fastest players on the team. And we just haven't seen it, Mark. So I guess he's, instead of, and credit to him too, Mark, I'll give him some credit too. You could probably tell he just wants to be at Florida. He could probably transfer and go play wide receiver somewhere else with the way the transfer portal works now. But he's staying. He's switching positions, going to go switch to the defense and become a safety there for the Gators. And we'll see if that athleticism can be untapped with a new look defensive coordinator. And Mark, probably one headline that should not be overlooked is Corey Raymond taking over the entire secondary now. He was just coaching the cornerbacks last year, of course, but now he's over the entire secondary. And that was something that was going to happen before Patrick Toney left and Austin Armstrong comes in anyway. But now Corey Raymond has one voice over that entire secondary. So you hope the communication's better on that back end, and now bringing somebody like Jamarcus Weston in. Mark, as I said, Florida, they got 2 safeties they can really count on right now in Kamari Wilson and Miguel Mitchell, but not much behind those 2 guys as far as proven depth goes at the safety position. So that you're looking for Jamarcus Weston to hopefully get some untapped potential with his athleticism at the safety spot. I wouldn't expect an immediate contribution this spring, but maybe when spring ends and some more reps in the fall, he can be a contributor there.
Got a comment or a question coming in from Roger Dodger. He wants to know if you're a Florida, Georgia guy from the standpoint of go to home and home or keep it in Jacksonville.
Keep it in Jacksonville, Mark. Couple reasons. We're losing tradition for college football year by year. It's changing a lot. That's something I'd like to see stay. I'm biased, don't get me wrong. I grew up in South Georgia, so it was always my closest drive to see Florida play. I grew up with Georgia fans. Us taking that trip to Jacksonville means a whole lot to, South Georgia Bulldog fans as well. That's their closest game. They don't have to travel to Athens, the 4-hour drive that goes to Athens. They take an hour-and-a-half drive to Jacksonville. They see their team once a year for an easier drive. And I live in Jacksonville now, so I'd hate to see the game move away from Jacksonville, partly because of tradition and just because, like I said, I'm a little biased there as well, just keeping the game here in Jacksonville. I enjoy the atmosphere that we get right there in late October, early November every year. Like I think we talked about it before, I could ultimately see it staying in Jacksonville, but Florida, Georgia, Gainesville, Athens probably thrown in the rotation somehow, some way, whether it be Jacksonville, Gainesville, Jacksonville, Athens, as far as the rotation goes, something like that. But Mark, I don't know what the future holds here. I know Jacksonville would love to keep the game. I know both schools make a boatload of money off of the game, of the city paying them to play the game here, but with all the SEC changes going on and Texas and Oklahoma coming in, I know they just came out and said last week that they have no plans of moving the game away from the Cotton Bowl. It's going to stay there for years to come, no matter what happens with the SEC. So, we'll see. The talk of moving it really didn't ramp up, Mark, till Kirby Smart got to Georgia and started throwing, the recruiting side of it in here. And I get that angle, but it's not hurting Georgia recruiting any. I mean, that's kind of, I think, where it gets lost on me a bit. It's not going to, I don't think it's going to affect Georgia recruiting one way or the other, especially now when you throw in one more conference game that gives them one more big game, possibly every other year to have at home. So, that excuse gets a little lost on me just because of how well they're already recruiting and how well they're already doing. But, I can see it. Maybe some fans to get to experience, if you're a Georgia fan, get to experience Gainesville. If you're a Florida fan, get to experience Athens. I can see a rotation happening sometime.
David, I want to get your take on this. So speaking of the schedule, and of course, the SEC is currently working out its scheduling format moving forward with OU in Texas. We would expect sometime around the Destin late spring meetings that would come out. So I was amused by both the comments made by Nick Saban and by Brian Kelly. So Brian Kelly comes out, and actually his comments pretty much went by everyone because they seemed legit, like, hey, I want a tough schedule. I came to the SEC. He gave us the same line that he did when he took the LSU job. I came to the SEC to play the best. So in terms of the schedule, he's like, bring it on, Alabama, whomever, bring it on. Well, my thought is that sounds good, Brian Kelly, but you're going to get the schedule that you're given anyway. So you might as well talk tough and sound like you want to take everybody on, because you're going to have to play that schedule anyway. Then Nick Saban comes out and says, LSU, Tennessee, Auburn, who makes these decisions? Well, any clown throughout college football, anybody who's connected in any such way, those are obvious. Auburn and Tennessee are obvious. They have to be playing. And then LSU and Alabama has been the highest rated TV game most seasons over the last 10 or 15 years. And it just amused me that Saban's, like, where did this come from? Like, we got to play these three teams. So that said, whether you want to comment on that or not, who are your three for Florida?
So I'll go to the comments first, Mark. My thing is, and I've thought about this, is it really that big of a deal if it's going to be the 3 permanent and 6 rotating, where you play 6 one year and 6 the next year? In that format, you're going to play LSU every other year anyway. Is it really going to be that big of a factor if you have to pay him every year? I mean, I think once you throw in 9 conference games, the difficulty of the schedule, I think the margin kind of goes down, or it actually gets even for a little bit for everybody in the conference, since you're having to play every other team every other year.
Absolutely.
Anyway, so it's not that big of a deal to me. Who you play every other year. Would it stink to lose some games that we're going to play every year? Yeah, I mean, it does look like if Ross Dellinger and his support, he's got a lot of SEC contacts, and he's thrown out kind of what he's heard, and he's heard for Florida. Of course, you're keeping Georgia. That game's not going anywhere. And then Oklahoma and South Carolina, I believe, are the 3 schools that Ross Dellinger put out there. So, of course, South Carolina makes a bit of sense playing them since the SEC East, but Oklahoma, okay, well, that's kind of a new one there. That would be for Florida. Florida has a rivalry with LSU, but you just throw out LSU's, and okay, you can't. It's tough to know how to break it up for LSU, because you're not getting rid of Ole Miss for them, you're not getting rid of Alabama for them, and now they want to, of course, elevate this Texas A&M LSU rivalry with the bordering states. So some games are going to have to get thrown away. So it does seem like Florida Tennessee also is going to get thrown away as an every year game. Florida LSU as an every year game. Compared to Florida, Oklahoma, and Florida, South Carolina. So I get the Gator fan angst of it sometimes of, hey, we're losing those games that have meant a lot to us since the 90s. We don't get those games anymore. But as I said, you get that game at least every other year now, because to me, I take the positives with the negatives, Mark. Hey, at least now we get to play Auburn a bit more. As you kind of alluded to when we started this segment, Florida and Auburn used to play a whole lot. And that was one of the SEC's oldest rivalries. And besides Georgia, Florida has played Auburn more than any other SEC school out there. It's the closest SEC school for Florida. And that rivalry went away with expansion or the schedule change in the 2000s. So at least we get that game back now more. And Florida gets to play the Mississippi schools now a bit more. So while you do lose, Florida Tennessee wasn't a rivalry till the 90s. Florida LSU wasn't a rivalry till the 2000s. So it's not like you're throwing away the tradition of those rivalries. At least we get Auburn back more. At least we get some of the other SEC schools back more, if it is that 3-6-6 model.
You nailed it when you said this model is going to just automatically make it more fair and even for everyone. It just will. It's not even debatable. For when you're taxed with having to play Alabama as your outside division opponent, as Tennessee is, for example, or your Ole Miss and you get Vandy every year, that's just an obvious advantage or disadvantage going forward. So that's the way it's been, and it'll be interesting to see how that's laid out. I've posted my video, folks, so check it out, my recommendations for the SEC. Not that they're listening to me. Well, Dave, I can't let you go without commenting about Graham Mert. So
Yep.
Billy Napier is saying some very nice things. As you stated before, as you started, it's talking season. So we can either talk up Graham Mertz or we can talk him down, but we're not going to know until the ball is in the air in September. But I just think there's this narrative. Okay, Wisconsin, they don't produce quarterbacks. He's no good. He's not going to be any good. I think there's a lot there to work with. I'm not selling him as being a great quarterback to date. He hasn't been, but he's been good enough to start for what's typically been a top 15 to 25 team in the country. And yeah, he had to lean on a ground game, but just your thoughts about whether we're hearing legitimate optimism out of Billy Napier or just maybe a lot of coach speak.
I think it can be coach speak, Mark, but also be the truth at the same time. And look, we should be hearing he's in the building almost 24 hours a day. He is learning the playbook. I mean, that's what we should be hearing about Graham Mertz there. So, right. And now with that, it does seem like, Mark, from what I can gather, it's he is taking more of the first team reps, more so than Jack Miller right now. So really no surprise. I think we all expected when spring practice ends for Florida and they play their orange and blue game that Graham Mertz will probably be the number one quarterback. And, looking at it, Mark, and him coming in, I mean, two things can be true at the same time. Was he as good as he needed to be at Wisconsin? No. Was Wisconsin's offense doing him any favors? Also, no. I mean, it was a run on first down, run on second down. It's 3rd and 7, 3rd and 8. Hey, go make a play. Okay, that's pretty difficult there. So, how much does the offense open up for him at Florida? How much can he open up the offense? I think is a fair question as well. Did Wisconsin not open up the offense because they found him to be a limited quarterback? So I think, the questions, Mark, are still going to be there. We don't know the answers till, as you said, till we see it. There is enough to say he made some bad decisions as a quarterback at Wisconsin, but there's also a lot to say that offense didn't do him any favors. So we really got to dive in. I'm sure Billy Napier did their homework. I'm sure they saw something they could unlock in him. They identified him early on in the transfer portal process. He was one of the first transfers Florida brought in the transfer portal process. He impressed them with his knowledge of the game and, watching the film with them. And that was something they determined, okay, we're going to bring him on board here. And Mark, at the time, it was because, okay, you had Jaden Rashada. You don't have to throw Jaden Rashada into the mix. And then we all know that whole saga, how it turned out. Well, now you're leaning on Graham Mertz to be your guy this season for Florida. So we'll have to see, Mark. Going back and looking at, we knew Florida was probably going to hit the transfer portal for a quarterback once Anthony Richardson declared for the NFL draft, and it was, hey, can Florida bring in somebody to make up for a retooled offensive line? Can Florida bring in somebody who still may have to make up for a pretty bad defense? And does Graham Mertz fit that profile? Not really. If Florida's defense is going to be that bad, if the offensive line doesn't come together as quickly as it should. So now if the offensive line comes together as quickly as it should, I think, a run game can help Graham Mertz. If the defense under Austin Armstrong is a substantial better defense, then Graham Mertz doesn't have to be and come in and be this savior for Florida football at the quarterback position. So, but he's not the type of quarterback, Mark, that's really going to elevate the team around him so much, I don't think. So he's going to need a whole lot of help, I think, this Florida run game. I think he can lean on. But I think it's a wait-and-see approach to see what around him, I think, can help Florida become a better team.
I differentiate arm talent versus arm strength, and I have no doubt that Graham Mertz has the arm strength to play and be a starting quarterback in the SEC. Look at the tape 2 years ago against Michigan. He came out of, it was either at the end of the first half or to start the second half, close game, and he threw one of the prettiest balls, your deep throws on a dime you're ever going to see. But I don't know, when we talk arm talent, like knowing trajectory, velocity, changes in velocity, accuracy, all those things, I don't know that he's proven that. But if you've got arm strength like he does, you've got the ability to possibly be coached in that direction and be better at those things than he has in the past, throwing 18 or 19 times a game.
Yeah, and you go into that, we saw a ton of transfer quarterbacks last year. All they needed was a new scenery, and there they are on the spotlight. Michael Penix goes to Washington and lights it up. Jaden Daniels transfers from Arizona State and has a really good year at LSU. Now, he's a little bit different because you saw early on in his career at Arizona State that he might be a pretty good quarterback, fell back down to earth a bit, and then reemerged at LSU. So sometimes it can just be new scenery to unlock what you see for a quarterback in their new destination.
Have you seen enough out of Jack Miller to know that he is not the guy?
Mark, I said that based off of most of last year. Even I see, Connor Johnson, Oregon State, even before the Oregon State bowl game, I wasn't a fan. Looking at the Ohio State spring game from a couple years ago, the Florida spring game last year, could he come in for a game or two, depending on the schedule, and do enough for Florida to win some games? Sure. Through a whole season, he's not carrying Florida to 8, 9 wins. When you take the schedule into totality, so he could maybe fill in for half a game, a series, a game or two, but it does depend on where in the schedule I think that falls.
You've got a beat on this fan base, and the worst place you want to be is, just delusional, or just to be empathetic about it and not care. I don't know that they're in that place, but they say for, us in the media, you either want your team to be fighting for a championship or you want them to be ready to fire the coach. And then that's going to get you clicks too. But that's not going to be the case in a second year. So, So Florida fan base, are they in kind of a malaise? Like, we haven't really seen, obviously we didn't get the season we wanted the first year. And then we haven't seen the recruiting be at the level that it needs to be to challenge Georgia.
Yeah, Mark, I still think there is that wait and see moment. Where is that moment? And look, we thought we got it right away with the win versus Utah. It was like, okay, it was game one. There it is. Billy Napier comes in right away, gets a win over, a Pac-12 favorite, a college football playoff favorite, and it didn't translate to anything. The very next week, Florida falls off of a cliff versus Kentucky, and the inconsistent season all throughout. So I still think they're waiting on that moment, Mark. As you said, the ever so important bump class probably wasn't as highly ranked as some prognosticators and maybe what history says it needs to be. And now, a 6-7 season and going into year 2 where you have a quarterback change, already a defensive coordinator change, but might actually be for the better. They're still waiting for that moment, the aha moment, Mark. And look, Florida could go to Utah week 1 and go beat Utah again, but then you're always going to fall back to, well, Florida did it game 1 last year and still finished 6-7. So I think even over a win versus Utah in game 1 this year, I think fans will still be wait and see mode just because of what happened last year for Florida. So I think, Mark, it's going to be a totality of a season, unless there's some big upset versus Georgia in the middle of the season, or you go on some kind of big run to where, you play in Georgia for all the SEC East marbles or something like that. But more than likely, Mark, it's going to come at the end of the season and see what Florida did versus Utah and Kentucky and Tennessee and LSU and Georgia and Florida State. I mean, there's 16 that is named right there. That's just going to probably determine Florida's schedule. Fans are kind of wait and see mode for what happens in those 6 big games for Billy Napier.
Well, our buddy here, Connor Johnson, after kicking you around for 4 touchdowns in the bowl game, now says even the commentators are better in the SEC. So after a kick in the rear, you get a pat on the back from Connor there.
Thanks, Connor.
David Waters, Gators Breakdown. He's the best covering Florida football. Get on over there. It's right here on YouTube. Gators Breakdown. It's also on your favorite audio platform. David, appreciate you stopping by, man.
Thanks, Mark.
Awesome stuff from David. As always, we've come to expect it. David and I go back, way back, covering the SEC. All right, we did have a few callers on the line. They got a bit impatient. I get that. So come on back, give us a call. We will leave the link back in the comments section so you can step on in. And there you go. So we did have some notes here, some things that I had gathered around the SEC, and maybe the most important, the most serious. Sorry to get serious on everyone here, but Georgia I heard Kirby Smart on one of the networks, probably ESPN or the SEC network the other day, talking about culture. And Kirby Smart's in a difficult spot, not from a football standpoint. He's in the best spot in the nation, of course. He's got the best team, the best talent, the best program. They're on a roll. He can do no wrong. But, wow, have they had an awful, awful off season. Ra Thomas, their transfer wide receiver pickup from Mississippi State with a felony assault charge, that's been dropped. So let's be fair there. We don't know what happened, but we'll just deal with the football end of things. We're not going to dive deep into these incidents, but how it affects football. So that's fine. He's cleared. He's ready to go. But there's indication there. Then we've got the drag racing. And we're talking about multiple. We're not talking about one drag racing event, one incident involving one player or two players in a car drag racing somebody else. We're talking about this has happened repeatedly. I went through the names the other day, and we had 5 players and an assistant, a recruiting analyst, involved in these 2 incidents. So I try to take a measured and balanced approach at reviewing these teams and these programs and the responsibility of the head coach. So first and foremost, it's all the responsibility of the head coach. They're at the top of the line. They are making all the money. They are responsible for everything that happens in that football program. That doesn't mean it's their fault. That means they're responsible. So Kirby Smart made it a point to say, we have an amazing culture here. And that's a buzzword. So culture is a buzzword. However you want to interpret culture. I'm not saying that there is a significant issue at Georgia involving culture, because again, we're talking about 5 players making a mistake, and for one of them, it cost him his life. But we're talking about there also being an incident after there was an incident prior to. And so we don't get the message across to another group of players, 2 or 3 players, after there was an incident with 2 or 3 players getting seriously injured and one killed. Then we have another group of players that go off and do the same exact thing. Again, can Kirby Smart control all that? Of course not, or he would have. But something is not being messaged effectively. I'm not saying it's not messaged properly, because those are 2 different things. Sometimes you can message something appropriately, properly, but if it's not getting through, it's not effective in some way. So a ton of off the field issues at Georgia. They were not given any room, any time to celebrate a national championship before they were hit, and Kirby Smart and his wife at 3 a.m. in the morning with tragedy. And that's unfortunate. And that's about all I have to say there, because I'm not connected with the campus. I think a lot of people go off and make evaluations and judgments that they don't know what they're talking about, and they do it from afar, like I am. Some things are obvious and can be put together, and you can make reasonable conclusions. But others, you got to say, okay, this doesn't look good, and here's a repeated offense. There, I'm sure, all sorts of good things going on within the walls of the football complex at Athens. But in this area, there's a lot of work to be done. There's a lot of messaging that has not been effective, because Kirby Smart said that they are messaging it, and they are saying all the right things, and they are pointing out the downside, the risks involved in certain behaviors, but they're still having 5 football players. That's quite a few. And again, the other incident was an incoming transfer wide receiver from Mississippi State, Ra Thomas. Look out for him. They picked up Georgia picked up 2 transfer wide receivers that are major pluses to that offense. And those players are Ra Thomas from Mississippi State, who finished in the top 10 in the SEC in touchdown receptions, and then Dominic Levet from Missouri, who finished in the top 5 in the SEC in yardage receiving. So the rich get richer, and Missouri's got to go out there sometime in October or November and play a Georgia team and think they've got our best wide receiver. They didn't have enough talent against us. Now they've taken our best wide receiver. Georgia played Mississippi State last year. Ra Thomas had a nice game against Georgia, playing for the Bulldogs of Mississippi State. And they say, this guy's pretty good. They grab him. They get him out of the transfer portal. Amazing. Again, we did have a few calls, and those folks got a bit impatient, and I totally understand it. Everybody's got their own schedule and timing, but call back, and we will talk some SEC football. Sandra, you might be right. You might be right. Jason's back in here, sticking up for the Big Ten. The real MVP's here. It's difficult to play Georgia, Alabama, and Tennessee in the same year. And so who would have to do that? Georgia, Alabama, Tennessee. I guess that would be Auburn in a year that they have Tennessee coming up. And maybe that's this year. I don't know. I haven't looked at the Auburn schedule. Yeah, that's rough. And Auburn is going to benefit from this schedule change because they play Georgia and Alabama every year. And that may continue, but I got to think that if the SEC is doing this right, they're going to do it one of 2 ways. Generally, although Greg Sankey, SEC commissioner, made a comment in the last 2 weeks that they've looked at 30 scheduling models. I don't know if I could come up with 30 scheduling models. I could come up with about 5 or 6, maybe 10. But they've had 30 submitted that they've looked over. But I got to think that in light of the way we're thinking of it and talking about it right now, there are 2 separate ways to do the 3-6-6. So you pick out the 3 permanent opponents, designated opponents, whatever the term is. Then you split the rest of the league, the other 12 teams, in groups of 6 and 6, and then you just alternate it. You play that 6 in 2024, you play the other 6 in 2025, then you go back to the other 6 and you play them in 2025. However, I would look seriously at that if I'm the SEC, because again, some teams, Auburn in particular, are going to have a difficult designation of teams. Georgia's going to be one. It's the South's oldest rivalry. I can't imagine that they're going to break up Auburn and Georgia, and they are so close in terms of distance. And then, of course, Auburn, Alabama has to be played. Okay. And let's understand, college football changes and the power structure changes throughout history. If we go back 20 years, the 2 best programs in the SEC were not Alabama and Georgia. They were probably LSU and Tennessee, or Georgia or Florida. It was pretty close for second. So it changes. It will change, but that's not of consolation to anybody right now that has to play Georgia and Alabama every year, and that would be Auburn. So you either give them a light touch on the 3rd opponent, Vandy, or you don't necessarily have to split it 6 and 6 and always alternate it. There are ways to massage that 6 and 6. Now you need to make sure that you're tracking the schedule year to year to year to year, so you don't let teams not play for more than, let's say, 3 years. But I've put together models where you don't have to stay strictly with that 6 and 6 portion of it. Plus, I also think you can do it this way. Now, they're not going to do it this way because they want to present a very formatted system to the public. But why does everybody have to have the same number of rivals? It's like it's the way it's formatted right now. Everybody has one non-division rival. Well, that makes sense for Alabama and Tennessee. That makes sense for Florida LSU to a certain extent. That makes sense for Auburn, Georgia. And you know what? That's it. For everybody else, it doesn't make sense. Ole Miss and Vandy are not rivals. Kentucky and Mississippi State are not rivals. They don't have to play every year. Texas A&M and South Carolina are the furthest thing from rivals that you can come up with in that conference. Why do they play every year? Well, they just need a placeholder. Why? And why do that going forward? Why do you have to have 3? Why can't some teams have 3? Some teams have 2. Some have 1. If you only have one true rival, just make that the one set game. Then you can work the rest of the schedule around that. It can be done. All right, we got the real MVP on the line. What's going on today?
Hey, Mark. You know, it's sad when your football season, your ultimate goal of just making a New Year's Six Bowl, it's already over before the season starts effectively. And that's the unfortunate reality of Kentucky football, having to play Georgia, Alabama, and Tennessee. So, you know.
Oh, I put Auburn in that comment. Of course, I should have known you were talking about your beloved Wildcats.
Yeah, well, Auburn, I would imagine, has to do it a fair bit more than Kentucky, but it is what it is.
Well, you have to play them this year. So you're playing Alabama this year.
Yes.
But I looked at that as that's something that maybe Auburn in the future would have to do.
Yes.
Okay.
I can see it both ways. Poor Auburn. Poor Auburn. You know, Mark, hopefully with the 12-team playoff expanding, if Kentucky were to go 9-3, they would get an invite. Hopefully the committee will look past the record and realize, hey, they had to play 3 of teams that finished in the top 6 this year. They deserve an invite over some 10-2 or even 11-1 potential teams.
So do you follow me on this last point that I made? Why does everyone have to have 3 rivals?
I have no idea. I'm assuming it's just for consistency for the casual fan out there.
Sure. I don't even know if the casual fan understands what the scheduling system is for any of these conferences.
Well, I don't know what to tell you, but I heard with the projection some guy made from the 366 model that Kentucky would still play Mississippi State every year. I'm like, good gosh, why Mississippi State? Can we please get rid of them? I don't care about Mississippi State football. I have no allegiance to Mississippi. I couldn't care less about Mississippi.
Yeah. It doesn't make any sense. You can build a schedule and say, and take every specific team and say, Alabama, they have how many rivals? LSU, Tennessee, Auburn. Okay, they've got 3 opponents that we're going to have them play every year. Okay, Kentucky, Tennessee, Vandy. Anybody else?
South Carolina, Missouri, something like that probably would be the
Missouri's a rival?
Kind of. I mean, more than Mississippi State.
Really?
Yeah. I mean, the last few years, the Missouri-Kentucky game's been competitive and a close game. It's kind of got heated.
Wait a minute here.
Yeah.
Missouri's been in the conference for 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
And just because they play in your division, and they're nowhere in proximity to Kentucky.
Okay.
And you're calling them a rival. Okay.
I'm just saying.
I think you have 2 rivals myself.
Yeah,
2.
if you're saying...
I think Florida's more of a rival.
If you're just saying who's Kentucky's main rivals, I would agree there's only 2. But I'm just saying what they're probably going to do. They're going to have to throw in a third team.
Oh, you're talking about what they're going to do. I'm talking about what they should do.
Right. Okay.
And I would only say, and this would confuse some people, and some people would be aggravated just because it's not symmetrical. I would say we are guaranteeing that these games are going to be played each year. Alabama's going to play Tennessee, LSU, and Auburn every year. Kentucky's going to play Tennessee and Vanderbilt and we're going to go down the line. Mississippi State's only going to play Ole Miss every year. We don't need to guarantee any other games for Mississippi State.
Right.
And everybody's going to be different.
I agree.
I don't see anything wrong with that.
I don't either. But, I'm not sure if the 3-6-6 model is the only model out there. I personally think the 4 pods model could be interesting. Have you heard about that, Mark?
Well, I put one together. So what have you heard there?
Well, you have 4 teams in a pod,
Sure.
and then you play 1 pod per year, and then you play one team of the other 2 pods every year, and then you rotate the pods, and the one team you play from the different pods. I think it'd be interesting.
Okay. I didn't put it together like that. I put 4 pods of 4 teams, obviously, and said you got to play everyone in your pod, of course. So that's only 3 games out of 9. And then I think you've got 6 other games that have to be played among the other 12 teams.
Right. So if you play another pod, that's 4. And then if you play one for another pod and from pod C and one from pod D, that'd be your 8th and 9th game.
Your 9. Okay.
I think that would create keep intact some rivalries. I think it would create a little bit more consistency for the schedule. And I think it would still create some of the it'd be more interesting to me. I kind of like it. It's kind of like an NFL type model.
It is, well, kind of, yeah. But the NFL creates its schedule outside of playing the other conference, a division in the other conference, and playing your own division creates that out of strength of schedule based on your record the previous year.
Right, and they could do something similar within the SEC.
No, I wouldn't do that.
Well, I mean, yeah, but what's the purpose? Are we trying to create an equitable schedule, or are we trying to create what's most entertaining for the fan?
Both.
Right. So I think there should be a little give and take. And I personally, as a fan, am going to advocate what's most entertaining for the fan. So I would love to see all the 1s play the 1s, the 2s play the 2s, the 3 play the 3s, and the 4 plays the 4s.
See, so I get that you and others want to see the best games and the best matchups. I just don't believe in rewarding failure and penalizing success. Like the NFL draft to me doesn't make any sense. Like this rarely gets brought up by anyone. I've never heard anybody bring it up except for myself. It doesn't make any sense, the order of the draft. You're rewarding failure and you're penalizing excellence.
Well, you know why they do it that way, Mark. They want parity.
Of course, I know that they've stated that. Pete Rozelle authored all that, and I get it from a business standpoint why you would want to do that, and I get it, but it really doesn't make any sense. Like it would be like if you're running a company and you say, this is our best employee, now we're going to make it as hard as possible for them to continue their excellence. This is our worst employee, and we're going to make their job even easier and as easy as possible. I just don't. I think the NFL draft should be completely random. They should pick it out of a hat for the first round, and then based on where you selected in the first round, then it's altered in the other rounds to make it extremely as fair as it possibly can.
Yeah, but the NFL is not going for fairness. No, none of their structure is about fairness. It's entertaining. That's what will probably end up happening is you will have a select few teams that are just completely dominating the sport, and you're going to alienate a large portion of the fan bases of just specific teams. There's a lot of NFL fans who will just watch their team. Just their team. And you got to
Sure.
give them a reason to watch. So if you're a Houston Texans fan this year, I mean, there's no reason to watch their games other than are we getting the number one pick? And by your
Okay.
model, with week 5, all of Houston Texan Nation is basically going to unplug.
Well, under my model, the Houston Texans would have a 1 in 32 chance of getting the number 1 pick in the draft, just like everybody else would.
Right. But if you're a Houston Texans fan and at week 5, it's obvious they're not making the playoffs,
Yes.
there's no incentive to keep watching them because you know everything that's going to happen going forward. They're not going to make the playoffs, and they're going to have the exact same odds as every other team to get the first pick.
I don't understand why what I'm bringing up is not a debate in sports. I don't understand. Everyone is just taking that as this is the way we do business. We reward awful franchises and we penalize excellent franchises. It makes absolutely no sense.
Because your goal is different from most people's goal. You want the best teams to dominate and get rewarded for it. The most people's goal is to have everybody be 8-8.
I shouldn't say I don't understand it, that it doesn't make sense. It makes sense for what? Yes, for what they're trying to achieve. But what's funny is the bad franchises continue to generally, now some of them straighten themselves out. They get a different general manager, they get a different player personnel director, and they figure it out, and they go from being a bad franchise, Cincinnati Bengals, to a great franchise. So it does change, but we've seen the Jets through the years continue to botch drafts, and so they can be rewarded with all the high NFL draft selections that we want to give them, but they just suck at running an organization, so they just continue to suck. The Houston Texans, the same thing. The Jacksonville Jaguars for years and years and years, same thing. All sorts of examples. The Detroit Lions, give them all the draft picks that you want. They're a terrible franchise. Bill Belichick, the Patriots, give them the end of the draft. They will still go to the Super Bowl.
Yeah, and that's what makes the Bill Belichick and the Patriots dynasty so amazing is how they were able to be consistent with all the hurdles they had to overcome. But like you were talking about the Jets might be a playoff team next year. I mean, they had an amazing draft last year with Sauce Gardner and a few other key defensive players. They might get Aaron Rodgers. He's pretty good at quarterback. You might have heard of him.
Where's he going to go?
To the Jets, Jets.
Yikes.
Yeah, he's following the ghost of Brett Favre around.
I was going to say they tried that with Brett Favre in 2009, whenever that was.
Yeah, that's been a heavily speculated rumor the last few days. Like, it seems like everything's done except Aaron Rodgers has to okay. And then the Detroit Lions, I mean, they were probably the most offensively fun team to watch. They would score tons and tons of points per game, but their defense was awful. They got a good head coach, it seems like. They're building up towards something. So you're giving these teams that are usually in the bottom feeder a chance to move up. And that's what the whole point of it is. And if we want any sense of parity in college football, we're going to have to make it to where some of these teams face some sort of penalty for being good. Otherwise, the best of the best just keep getting better, and the worst of the worst just keep getting worse.
It would be similar to if somebody gave you $1 million to invest and they gave me $1 million to invest, and you invested it wisely and you were building on your money. But you had to pay a luxury tax to me because I squandered the money. I invested poorly and I continued to lose money, but you had to pay me a luxury tax to try to lift me out of a hole and penalize your excellence in investing your money. That's what's going on.
Right. But see, Mark, that's about being as successful as possible in life. This is about entertainment we're talking about. This is about having fun. They're completely different goals. If the goal of the NFL is to reward the best team, then this is a completely wrong system.
No, I don't think they should be rewarded either. It should just be fair.
It's not about being fair. It's about what's most fun for the viewer.
I would like to see it done my way for 20 years to see what the result would be.
So if you were a Jets fan over the last 20 years? What reason would have there been to watch football over the last 20 years?
Well, I do know that the Jets could have drafted later in the draft, and if they knew what they were doing, still select some excellent future Pro Bowl players and become a good team.
Right, but the casual fan or just fans in
Yes.
general think the higher the pick, the better chance you have at getting a good player.
Sure, and that's true.
So if you say, hey, Jets in Kansas City, you're going to be completely random where you draft. Okay, the Jets, once they're eliminated from the playoffs, most of their fan base is going to tune out because they have no incentive to keep watching their team.
Until we hold the lottery.
Yes, and then they will tune back in, but there's a large gap of time between actual games and the lottery. And the NFL, I imagine, wants to keep as many fans engaged for as long a period of time as possible. And even in the final week of the season, the Bears stole basically the number one pick from the Texans because the Texans beat the Colts while the Bears lost their game. So those teams are watching in the final week of their season, and I'm sure they were engaged, whereas in your system, they wouldn't have been engaged.
Yeah, I'm just telling you the way things would be equitable and the way I would run it. I just find it amusing that like nobody questions why. And so then we continue to do this. We do this with this has creeped into fantasy leagues. You finished first last year. Well, you got to select last. You finished last. You got to select first. Why?
That, I guess it's for the same reasons, but that makes a little less sense to me, but it's probably for the same reason.
Yeah, well, it's because we get programmed as humans and we don't question things. We just do them because that's the way we were brought through whatever system or raised to think that this is the way you do it without questioning and thinking, does that make any sense?
Right. And Mark, a large reason why I'm doing this is because first off, I'm a fan of parody and I like being fun. And second off, as a fan of Kentucky football, you understand that if we were to do it your way, Kentucky would basically have no chance. You understand that, right? That we would have no chance of being competitive ever. Like ever.
Well, if we combined all of college football, maybe Kentucky would have more of a chance because they wouldn't have to play a complete SEC schedule.
Yeah, but they still would eventually have to run into the big dogs. And I just don't think they could ever compete with the big dogs.
Yeah, I don't know what has to change there. I think Mark Stoops is doing an excellent job. And for as high as he's lifted that program, and as we have mentioned, 3 10-win seasons since 2018, that's still a large gap between that and winning a national championship.
Right.
Enormous.
And Joey Foster, he brought up a question in chat earlier saying, let me see if I can find it. It said it was talking about what could Kentucky do to win the SEC in 2023. Play basketball would be the answer, Mark. That's probably going to be the closest answer you could get. But I tell you what, Roger Dodger says, so Nick Saban couldn't make Kentucky a winner. I don't think any coach can make Kentucky a national championship team. I think certain programs have ceilings below them that are national championship. I think, heck, that's the majority of programs.
Well, Roger Dodger brings up another experiment that I would love to see done, which will never happen, of course, and that's that we send coaches to certain programs to see how well they would do. I would love to see that.
Right, but I think you understand, Mark, that Kentucky, regardless of their head coach, is not going to win the national championship. I would be shocked if they won the national championship. It's just...
If you send Nick Saban to Kentucky and let him coach for 5 years, man, I don't know how much better their recruiting goes, though.
Right, that's the problem.
Significantly. No, I got to think that it's going to be, I don't know that they're going to challenge for the number one class in the country, but I think it would be a destination.
Right. I mean, they could end up top 15. I think, with Nick Saban. But I don't think that's good enough to win the national championship.
Top 15?
Yeah.
They can do that already.
They can rarely. It takes a lot to go together, but I mean, this year they're 28th, 29th with the 12th or 13th best class in the SEC.
Oh, you were talking about their recruiting class. I got you. I was talking about in the national polls.
Oh,
Okay.
yeah. And the national polls, they can end up probably top 10, top 5. But I don't think they'll ever be competitive in terms of having a chance to win the national championship. I think Nick Saban can get the most out of the players and overperform somewhat. But I don't think they could beat Georgia, LSU, shoot, even Alabama. So,
for anybody out there that believes that there is more parity in college football than actually exists near the top, just again, consider the score of the national championship game. And I truly believe that TCU would give Georgia a better game if they played another 10 times, but not. They could have scored 3 more touchdowns and it's still a complete annihilation. Like, that's how much of a gap there is in college football.
right. And I just don't understand how making a 12-team playoff is going to close the gap, because
It's not.
Mississippi State, I don't see how they improved since they made the college football playoff. Oregon, I don't see them getting over the hump. Cincinnati made the
Who's
playoffs
the first
2
team
years
you mentioned?
ago. Michigan State.
Oh, Michigan State. Okay, yes.
Michigan State, I mean, they didn't improve a lot because they made the playoffs. Oregon, I didn't see improve a ton because they made the playoffs. Cincinnati got a coach that was 1 game above 500 after making the playoffs. I just don't see this idea of making the playoff instantly means your program's going to ascend.
There are people out there, and we've heard from a number of them, and I respect most of them. I think Steve Dace is one of them, who believes that by opening up the college football playoff, that there are schools on those next 2 and 3 tiers that will be able to sell getting to a playoff to top recruits and get them to their program.
Yeah, on that, I told you previous call that there was a part where I completely vehemently disagreed with Steve Dace, and that was it. Because I don't see anybody from TCU going in there and saying, hey, to recruit, hey, we're only 58 points away from winning the national championship. I just don't see that being the case as a selling point.
I don't see it either. Maybe in some small ways, but not enough to move the needle. Not enough to move the needle.
Right, and there's only 4 teams that make the college football playoff. So you think TCU would be able, if making the playoffs was this, heck, they made the national championship, but just saying to make the playoff, they're way outside the top 4. They're what, in the mid-20s or mid-30s in recruiting right now?
Yeah.
I mean, they get a small bump, but they're so far off of where they need to be to win the national championship still, in my opinion. So,
yeah, like we've talked about in the past, I do agree with your assessment of what this is going to look like on the field in the future with the 12-team playoff. I am just a proponent of the expansion of the playoff because I believe that all the conferences should be represented. And because we do now have, I think this season, it's going to be up to 133 FBS teams, that we need more representation from other schools, and they need to be given the opportunity. Now, their ability to seize the opportunity is a completely different matter.
yeah, I can respect you for that because at least you're able to make the distinction. I think a lot of people are wanting to expand the playoffs because they think it will naturally close the gap.
Yeah,
and I just don't see that being the case.
I don't see it either. And for as funny as it sounded when you would get on here and talk about 4 teams or at least 3 teams in a 12-team playoff from the SEC getting to the Final Four, I think that's completely reasonable.
I think that'll eventually get to the point where it should be expected. Like, look at this year. I mean, you would have had even this year with how, quote unquote, the gap's closing between the SEC and Big Ten. you still would have probably had 2 SEC teams in the Final Four with Georgia and Alabama. I mean, I think Alabama could beat USC and Michigan. And I mean, if Michigan can't beat TCU.
Basically, if you take the aggregate of the 9 years of the playoff, you get what we are talking about going forward. 3 spots go to the SEC in the Final Four, and 1 spot goes to Clemson or Ohio State. And that's pretty much what the playoff has been.
Right. Now, that wouldn't have happened this year, but I think most years the 5th seed will either be an SEC team or Ohio State. I don't think it's going to be a TCU type team going to fill that spot. I don't see the Big 12 being a potential 5 seed ever going for. I think this year was just a complete anomaly.
The Big 12 has built a really good league. And again, I'm on record of saying this a number of ways that I love what the Big 12 is doing. And I love the addition of these schools because it just gives us more interesting games, different teams involved, teams that will probably be decent. I don't expect them to win 10 games or be vying for playoff spots unless they change considerably, unless a school like Houston can take advantage of their recruiting footprint, which I doubt. But there'll be a lot of fun 48-45 games between UCF and TCU and Texas Tech and Cincinnati and so forth and so on. But when it comes to competing for national championships, they're actually going to lessen they're going to be damaging the records, the overall records of their best teams, because they're going to have to play 3 or 4 additional decent teams. And they're not going to be so good. They're not going to be Georgia, Ohio State good, where looking at UCF is nothing. Those are going to be possible upsets.
Right. I think out of all the conferences, the Big 12 going forward probably has the least chance to win the national championship. I would even put the Pac-12, if they exist. Now, that is a very key distinction. If they exist, the Pac-12 in a few years, they have a better chance because I think Oregon or Washington can get on a run.
Yeah, they've shown it throughout their history that Oregon and Washington, and to a lesser extent Utah, are more formidable than anyone in the Big 12 at their peak. I'm not saying every year, folks, don't jump on me. At their peak, nobody in the Big 12 can hang with Oregon at its peak, Washington at its peak.
Right, exactly. And so what I think what will happen is people are going to realize this is going to be a mistake because their goal is going to have what they desire is not going to happen, and the inverse will happen. I think there are people who think if we have more teams in the playoff, then that's a greater chance that the SEC doesn't make the playoff because they're contributing each team as a same likelihood to advance into the next round. And I don't think that's the case at all.
Wet blanket, Oklahoma State fan. I hope you understand because you're here all the time. So you should understand I'm not here to piss anyone off or diss any league, but I'm here to tell the truth. And again, I think the Big 12 is going to be fun. And I know, yes, the Big 12 was in it this year. Yes, they got a team in. They won a game. They're not winning. And so much would have to happen. I can't foresee for a team in the Big 12 to be a legitimate national championship contender, a legitimate one, not make the playoffs. Yeah, they're going to get playoff spots and they're going to lose by 3 touchdowns in the second round.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, if TCU were to play Ohio State this year, Mark, I mean, let's be honest. What would the score of that game been? 45-3?
Well, I think that Ohio State defense would have let up some points, but I think we're in the 45-20 range.
Exactly. I just don't see it.
Georgia scored 65. Maybe Ohio State, they've got as good or better offense than Georgia. I don't know what. That thing might have been like 63-28 or something like that.
Right. I mean, no offense to TCU. They had a great run. But if you told me TCU had to go out and play Oregon State, Kentucky next week. I mean, I wouldn't shoe in a complete win for TCU in either of those games.
No, not at all. Not at all. Yeah, if TCU was leaving to join the SEC, and they're playing Ole Miss and Mississippi State every week, and Kentucky and Arkansas, right? Even if they could keep the team that they had this last year, I don't know.
This is my favorite comment, because I hear this argument a lot from Scope 790. Why is Darrell against more games? Give me more games and make the season as long as possible, and give everyone at least the hope of doing something in the playoff. Hey, Mark, how many Division II football games have you watched this season?
I was not able to get to any of those.
Well, how come you weren't watching them? Don't you like more football? I thought more football automatically equal good football, Mark. So how many XFL games have you watched?
None.
I thought more football was more football, and that's a good thing.
I love football, but there's a line.
Oh, there's a line. And don't you think that line might be the quality of the product on the field?
Yes.
How many Conference USA games did you watch this year? Did you watch all of them? Because that's more football, Bart.
Conference USA. I think I watched all my Conference USA in bowl games.
Okay.
When there was nobody else playing.
Well, you should have watched their regular season, Mark. I mean, you would have seen App State throw that Hail Mary against Troy on ESPN Plus.
Yeah, I didn't see it.
Yeah, exactly.
I heard about it,
more football is more football. I don't understand that argument at all. How about we expand football? How about not only have a playoff, but have an NIT-like bracket, have a CBI-like bracket? How about we just have all these brackets for teams that didn't make the playoffs, Mark? Because that'd be more football.
Well, during the COVID year, we were talking about doing a spring season.
Yeah, I understand that, but at least that would have been regular season football. I'm saying for all the teams that didn't make the playoffs, okay, you have another larger bracket, or smaller bracket, I guess, of NIT teams. Have 12 NIT teams from 13 to 24, and then have another from 25 to whatever 50 of CBI teams. That way, it's more football, Mark. I just don't like that argument at all, because it's not about the actual football on the field. It's about the quality of football being played.
I'm going to make one other comment, then we're going to move on to our next caller. But Wet Blanket, appreciate you being here. Love that you're here supporting your team, Oklahoma State. I'm always saying that I'm tired of talking about Georgia, Ohio State, Clemson, etc. That I love to hear from other fan bases and hear from other tiers of football that get underrepresented. But again, I'm just here to tell the truth. And unless things drastically change in some way, which the money structure is telling us they're not changing, they're being expanded upon, who in the Big 12 is going to be competing for a national championship? I'm not talking about being given a playoff spot. I'm talking about seriously competing for a national championship, because there's nobody left in the Big 12 who has ever seriously competed for national championships on anything close to a regular basis. No one.
Yeah, I mean, the Big 12 is going to be a nice conference to watch for the competitive race. It's going to have tons of parity in there, but nationally, they're probably not going to get a lot of attention, because their best team's going to be, 9-3, 10-2, and have almost no shot to make the playoff or do anything once they're in the playoff.
Darrell, appreciate you being here.
Yeah, good talking to you, Mark.
Absolutely. Have a good one.
You do the same.
Yes, Clint is letting us know. I completely agree. The Big 12 is stable. Win no more attractive. I think that he's saying with no more attractive brands. I love the Big 12. I hope I'm wrong. I seriously do hope I'm wrong. But just look at each remaining program in the Big 12, make an evaluation of that program versus where they're headed, where they've been, and make a case that they have competed for national championships, not made a playoff and gotten blown out by 1 million points. Because that's different. And now they got to go through 3 or 4 teams. Wow. Randy's on the line. Randy, what's going on today?
Oh, not a lot, Mark. things just I had an opportunity, to check out the show again, and I figured I'd give it a listen.
Well, we're glad that you're here. The
It's kind of
Bulldogs
been
on
all
your
over the
mind.
place. Yeah, it's kind of been all over the place today. Little I know, I think it was you at some point said that you what you hope these live shows would be is people from other conferences coming in and mixing it up with the conference that's being represented. Now, if that wasn't you, apologies, but I think that was you that said that.
Yeah, the
So
only
it
thing
seems
we
like
are committed to is talking SEC football during this show. But I love to see for other fan bases, like we've got Connor here from Oregon State and others, Michigan
Mhm.
fans, Ohio State fans, I see.
Yeah, I think it's great.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I think it's great. And that's what I was getting at. It's just that it's that we've kind of ping ponged all around college football today. So again, being at noon when the show kicks off, that's a little early for me because usually I'm up really late. So I'm happy to be able to make an appearance or at least be able to listen in, and it's been entertaining. I don't have anything specific. I mean, I'm just excited that spring football is here because like today, Georgia gets things underway. I guess their first full practice might be tomorrow, but they get things underway today, and the freshmen have already been on campus and sort of like the practices for them to kind of get them acclimated to everything. And so we're cranking it up down here, and football's coming. We're only what 6 months, 7 months away, so it's going to be here soon.
We are actually only just over 5 months.
5 months.
August 26th is week 0. So on the 26th of March is going to be 5 months.
Yeah, see, so I told you it was early for me, man. Yes, but yeah, we're looking forward to it down here. We're about to get some actual reports from the field, which is nice, and there's plenty of things to look at here as far as I'm concerned with my squad. But the SEC is, there's always something to talk about. That's for sure.
So, Randy, it doesn't sound like you heard what I had to say about Kirby Smart and Georgia's culture.
Actually, I did hear that. I like I said, it was early, so I was still having my first cup of coffee and hanging out with my little daughter. So I couldn't comment or have anything really to say. It has not been a good spring at the University of Georgia, that's for sure. The only thing I would point out is, and I'm not sure if you clarified this or not, because again, I was a little distracted, but the only thing I would say is that the incidents that everyone is aware of, all of those, I'm not sure your timeline was correct, because the last incident was the one where the people lost their lives. So the Jamon Dumas Johnson incident was like a week prior or something. So, and during the fall, there had been incidents where players had been, specifically Jalen Carter, had been pulled over for speeding and then not ticketed, right? So it had been an ongoing problem with him in a reckless driving sense. So the only thing I would say is that I'm really, really saddened that it took a tragic loss of life, which actually hits really close to home for me because the young lady who was involved is from my hometown. So, I know her family, or, of her family, and because it is a small town. So I hate that that's what it took, but there hasn't been another incident since that occurred. As to and I'm not excusing anything. All those things were dumb choices that young people made, and each individual is responsible for their own choices. I do, again, I can't tell you how much I hate that that was the consequence for those individuals. To culture as a whole, though, again, you said it's a buzzword, and we define it however we want to. But I truly believe that if you want to see the culture at Georgia, then if you're going to look at what makes the news reports, then because you're a football fan, you should also consider the evidence you see on display at places like the NFL Draft Combine, where you have Nolan Smith, Keely Ringo, Chris Smith, and the list goes on and on and on, just like it did last year. And the culture that those guys speak about, the way they represent the university. You can't take half of it and say, I think a commenter said thug life or something earlier. You can't. I mean, you can do that if you want to, but that just appears to be sniping, because you don't like a university. I just think you have to take the whole picture if you're going to do that. And the dominant example we have is one of people who do things the right way and run a program that does things the right way, and individuals make mistakes, and that's tragedy. So the culture, I'm not at all concerned about the culture at the University of Georgia. I'm very much concerned that for whatever reason, Kirby did not make it a priority earlier to stamp out that kind of behavior, because he is ultimately responsible, because he, not for their actions, but responsible for them as people under his watch. And when you have as much control over a situation at the University of Georgia as Kirby does, you can't make me believe that he could not implement some sort of structure or guardrail or threat of loss of playing time or whatever it is to get people to not act in a certain way. I refuse to believe that. So I don't understand why it took so long. But again, the overarching question of culture is not something I'm concerned about.
So my approach here is always going to be to give the benefit of the doubt. So I'm never going to grab a thread of evidence or even an incident and then make a big narrative out of it and accuse people of something that may not be reality, or take a narrative and blow it out of proportion and take the negative side, err on the negative side. I'll always err on the positive side and give the benefit of the doubt, not knowing everything that's going on, in this case, between the walls of that particular football program. And that's why I said, and to me, I'll try to define culture as it's ultimately manifested in behavior, the values. So the values, the beliefs, the ethics and morality of the organization that is then exemplified in behavior, both positive or negative. And so for me, that's why I didn't consider this a culture issue. Maybe it is that I'm just not aware of, but based on what we know, I don't consider it a culture issue. I think that there's, for some reason, a problem with this one type of behavior.
I don't know that you can draw any kind of line. Okay, so let me preface what I'm about to say with that, and because I don't have a reference other than Atlanta and Georgia. Okay, so but I know in this area for the last year and a half, 2 years, the whole idea of drag racing and burnouts and locking down intersections because of these displays that fly up on social media, that has been a big deal here in the Atlanta area. And people have been really trying to get their hands around what to do about it, how to stop it, why is it happening. People have lost their lives at these incidents and things like that. Does that feed into what these people are, I hate to say what I'm about to say, but these people are 18 to 24, 25, whatever. Does it feed into what they're doing? Do they look at that and say, that's cool? Maybe. I don't know. For someone like me, it's completely lost on me because I'm not a car guy in any way. I don't care as long as you get from point A to point B. But I know for some people, that's their entire identity. Maybe that's who these people, maybe they fancy themselves that way. I legitimately don't know. But I do know that in this area, it is something that happens and gets a lot of press. And, we know based on, speaking of Jalen in particular, we know based on what we've seen from body cams and stuff like that, that this was not, his first incident with a vehicle and going too fast, driving too fast, driving recklessly in the Athens area. So, is it one person making a mistake? Maybe. But it's either any way you put it, any way you spin it. It just hasn't been a good spring, and it hasn't been a good look. Because when you are at the top of whatever it is, pick a thing, the spotlight is brighter, so everything is magnified. And just to bring it back between the lines a little bit, I think this is a season of flux for Georgia football, right? I mean, we've talked about it before: new offensive coordinator, new quarterback, so on and so forth. I think that where Kirby could get in trouble between the lines is if he doesn't see the emergence of players who have been performers on the field, who then take absolute ownership of the situation and become leaders in this regard too. So leaders in the locker room, and where they demand that stuff like this doesn't happen, both because of where they are and because of what they are trying to accomplish. So if that doesn't happen, if you don't have these leaders emerge, then Georgia is not going to win a third national title. They're not going to win the SEC. They're not going to be as successful as they possibly can be. Do I think that there's still time to make all that happen if you're inside that locker room? Yeah, I do. But I know that if it doesn't happen, they're not going to achieve in the way that they hope to achieve.
Absolutely. I can't add anything else to that whatsoever.
Now, I mean, and we can talk about Georgia as much as you want. I'm all about it. We can break it down however you like. But I did know, I saw your conversation with Wet Blanket there. And I was on your show before saying something similar to what you're saying, laying out the argument that I just don't know that the Big 12 is going to be in a position to win national titles moving forward. Could that change? I don't know. I just, at the end of the day, and I've said this several times, it's going to take, the rent is high, and it's going to take a commitment to be able to stay in that top tier that I'm not sure most of the schools across the country are going to be able to make. So that's just the bottom line, because when you're looking at a squad like Georgia, it's they just had the number 2 recruiting class. They spent the most on recruiting of anybody in the country. They've had a number 1 class somewhere in the last 3 or 4 years. They haven't been outside the top 3 in the last 5 or 6 years. So when you're compiling a roster like that, and they're looking ahead to this next signing class, they have the number 1 class right now. They're probably going to go wire to wire with the number 1 class. I just don't know. That just takes money. It's marketing and it's talent acquisition. And if you are not in a position to do that, then it takes more than talent. You have to have coaching, you have to have development, which the NFL Combine tells us that Kirby's staff has in spades. When you put all those things together and then you actually like each other, you get a synergy that makes you hard to beat. And I'm not just talking about Georgia. I mean, there are other teams and we all know who they are. There's 5 or 6 of them that could get there. I mentioned in the chat earlier, I think Oregon is really close. I think Oregon has the potential, regardless of which conference they end up in, if they move or if they stay. Dan Lanning is bringing in what he knows, which is SEC and before that Midwestern style bodies, talented athletes. He knows about what it requires to get the job done from an organizational standpoint. I think Oregon is really close. I don't know that this year's the year, but they could very, very quickly build themselves into a dominant program, regardless of which conference they're in. So I think if you sleep on the Ducks, you're doing yourself a disservice.
I come at from this standpoint. Oklahoma and Texas will no longer be in the Big 12. They are the only two schools that have in anybody's lifetime that is watching this won a national championship. So you take those two schools out of the Big 12. None of those schools have ever won a national championship since like TCU did in the 30s. Yeah. So we don't have any. We have no examples of anyone winning a national championship in the Big 12. Okay, that's number one. Or competing for anything close to a national championship for, I guess, Oklahoma State in 2011, when they could have been selected to play for a national championship instead of Alabama or LSU, instead of Alabama in 2011. And I will be the first one to say that even though I don't think Oklahoma State was anywhere close to those two teams, that they should have been selected to play for the national championship since Alabama already had its shot, did not win a division, did not win the conference. However, we're looking at having to win 3 to 4 games against elite competition in the future to win a national championship. Not somehow win your league, go 11-1, and get a shot in a BCS championship game and get one shot like Texas did in 2005. And that was a great Texas team. I'm not discounting their national championship, but they're not going to be in the league. And Joey's brought up a bunch of years that I'll address when Joey jumps on here, because the first one I'm looking at, they went in 2012, West Virginia went 7-6. So I don't know what he's referring to there. In 2011, they went 10-3. So they were 10-2 in the regular season. That team's not winning a national championship. So I don't know when West Virginia was really ever a national championship caliber team. Could they have made a playoff? Yeah, they could have made a playoff. But again, my point was the difference between making a playoff, i.e. Michigan State in 2015, Washington in 2016, TCU this last year, and winning a national championship is going to be, it's already this big, and it's going to be even wider going forward. And these Big 12 teams are going to be earning $31 to $32 million a year in revenue versus what the Big 10 and the SEC teams are going to be making in the $80 to $90 million year range.
Correct. And again, you just put all those things together. It's not saying that the league is not good. It's not saying that the league does not have championship caliber teams inside their league. It's just a reality across the college football landscape. I mean, there's schools like Houston, for example, like TCU, Dallas, Fort Worth. They are in metroplexes where money exists. They can build their programs to a place where they can win that conference, hands down, no problem. But then you get to the thing that has separated the SEC for the last 15 years. Yeah, well, maybe 17 years, the last 15 for sure. And that is, it's not that you have, I'll talk about my team. It's not that you have one Jalen Carter or one Michael Williams. It's that you've got 6 or 8 of those dudes on your roster at the same time. And you can rotate those players through there. It makes a difference when, and you saw it against TCU. You saw it against Oregon. You saw it against the teams that Georgia played this year. When you've got 8 guys along the defensive line that you can roll through there, and they're playing 20 snaps a game as opposed to 60, right? They're going to be better than the offensive tackle who is dying in the fourth quarter because he's exhausted from having to face a new stud rusher every third play. And, I mean, it just matters. And there's nobody else across the country that's stacking talent in that way, right? I mean, even if you look at the other top tier teams like a Michigan, like an Ohio State, a USC, well, they don't play defense yet, but
wouldn't really put Ohio State in the category of those other two schools in terms of recruiting.
You mean Ohio State would be better?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, even if you look at that though, and please educate me if I'm wrong, but I can look at, say, a Michigan, right? They had Hutchinson. They had the one stud guy with a pretty good guy on the other side. So you had those 2 dudes that were getting after the passer. both of which pretty much were rendered invisible when they played against Georgia.
Yeah. Well, their other pretty good guy as a starter in the NFL.
That just strengthens my point, right? That's what I'm saying. And if you look at Ohio State, I can't name them. Who were their best two defensive linemen this year?
Probably Teron Vincent, Zach Harrison, Tui Molowau.
Mhm.
Yeah.
But we're talking about what, 3, 4? I don't know. That's my point.
Jack
is that when
Sawyer. Those guys are all 5 stars.
right. But again, we're talking about 3 or 4, right? And the thing that makes the league different is, and that's what people whose teams don't play in the SEC dismiss and don't give credit to the SEC as a whole for, is that Georgia and Alabama, LSU, maybe Florida, back when they were really strong, when it was their turn at the top, you're looking at those teams don't have 3 or 4, they have 6 or 8 guys that are all, fractionally different and very impactful in the game. But even as you move down through the league, Vanderbilt has those dudes. They just don't have as many, right? Kentucky has those dudes. They put guys in the NFL. They just don't have as many. Same thing for Arkansas or Auburn or
Well,
the list goes on. That's what differentiates. No, what I'm saying is that's
you're
what
not lifting third and
differentiates.
fourth place teams in the SEC to the best teams in the Big Ten or in another conference, are you?
Well, I'm not. If we're talking in terms of team, I'm saying positionally speaking.
On the defensive front.
Right. So like Ohio State might have 4 or 5, whatever it is. You're like, that's the top tier for recruiting. I'm saying that Auburn might have 2, right? So it's in that you differentiate who is the top teams inside the SEC. It's the ability to roll those players. And that same metric works across the college football landscape, right? And secondarily to that, it's not just the defensive line, it's the lines of scrimmage as a whole that make the difference. Without a doubt, Ohio State has the best skill position players, especially wide receiver. I think most people would be just, yeah, that's right. We can argue who might have the best running back room or the best quarterback room or whatever, but as a whole, that they're going to have top tier skill players. We know that. People joke about it all the time. When was the last time you had an Ohio State quarterback that didn't put up crazy numbers, that did not succeed, right? So there you go. But the lines of scrimmage, football's still football. The lines of scrimmage matter, and that's where championships are ultimately won. So you can then parse that out and say, well, defense wins championships. Okay, look at the defensive lines of the championship teams, and you tell me that those teams don't have great defensive lines. Clemson, when they had their 2-year run, same thing. They had dominant defensive line play. So I don't know. I think it's you build your team however you want to, right? That's the benefit of being the head coach, and you can build it any way you want to. But when you're talking about competing on a national stage, because even when Georgia wasn't winning, in the numbers that we have them now, and that's the difference, that along with the coaching and development that we talked about earlier. So, and that comes back to why the Big 12 is not the kind of league that I think is going to be able to compete for national titles moving forward. I just don't know that they have the ability to stack players that way, because you have to do all of the marketing, i.e. recruiting, it takes to get those players there. Will they ultimately be willing to make the investment necessary to do that? So I'm trying to dovetail it all for you here. I hope I didn't wander too far afield.
No, good stuff. Well, Randy, I appreciate you being here. Good to see you.
Yes, it's fun. Like I say, I hope to listen in. Thanks for doing the show, and keep things rolling at the Voice of College Football. Don't forget to hit the thumbs up, y'all.
Thank you, Randy. Have a good day.
See ya.
All right. Joey's got a bone to pick with me here.
No, not really. I actually, if you had read my comments on down, I said not 2012. Sorry, it was a typo. I messed up on 2012.
Okay.
But no, my point was not necessarily that we would be playing for national championships, but we would have made playoffs probably those years.
Well, my point was making the playoff versus being good enough to win a national championship. There's a chasm in this sport that's larger than any other sport by far.
You don't think we were good enough in 2007 to have won a national championship?
Maybe if you were in the national championship game, did you have a good
Right.
enough team to win in 160 minutes, 3.5 hours?
Yeah. So,
Maybe.
you know, I do look at it. Okay, so we played the national championship in '88, and we played for a share of it in '93. And if we'd have gotten to play Nebraska in '93, we would have been a much better team than we were against Florida, just simply because
Maybe.
we didn't want to be in that game.
In your opinion.
In my opinion, we didn't want to be
Yes.
in the game, right?
Yeah.
And another thing too, so everybody's talking about, well, you're not going to be able to build a good program. It's not necessarily going to be the money that the program's getting. Sure, that's going to help with facilities, but what's going to help build programs right now is NIL. And you know, some of these Big 12 programs have pretty strong NILs. West Virginia being one of them. So, you know, every program goes through a down period, and we're going through a down period right now. You know, and stuff. But I think we'll bounce back. Not this year. But we won't bounce back this year. But I think we'll bounce back here in the next year or two.
If we're sitting here 10 years from now and the Big 12 has won 3 national championships, then every Big 12 fan in the world can call me and tell me I was completely wrong, and I will take it. But I am not expecting to sit here in 10 years and acknowledge any Big 12 national championships. That a lot is going to have to change, and it can change. Houston's sitting in one of the best NFL cities for developing NFL players anywhere. And UCF's in the middle of Florida. There's all sorts of potential out there, but the way it's currently operated and the current trajectory of these programs and where the money is coming in, I don't see it. And again, I don't see even the history.
Well, I mean, I agree with you. I really do. I agree with you 100%. But I still think, you know, we're going to a 12-team playoff, and things happen in football. You know, that the coin flip can change the trajectory of a game, right? And
it has to happen 3 or 4 times.
Right, but I'm just saying, by 2030, I think the Big 12 will have a national championship. I believe somebody in the Big 12 will win a national championship by 2030. Is that going to be consistent with your 3 over 10 years? Probably not. I agree with you. It won't be 3, but
People can call me and
we'll be competing, of course. I think, you know, of course, we're going to make playoffs. We're going to go to a 12-team playoff.
well, yeah,
So we'll make
everybody's gonna be in
playoffs. Right, but can they win a couple of playoff games? I think so. I think you know there'll be
again,
time.
Joey, I'm not discounting somebody's going to win a playoff game. TCU just won a playoff game last year. Absolutely. I'm talking about winning a national championship. I would bet $1,000. If somebody wants to bet me $1,000, we're going to have somebody hold the money for 7 years. But I would bet against the Big 12 winning a national championship by 2030.
You would, well,
I don't know who's winning a national. They haven't won one in the last 7 years or even the 7 years before that. And they didn't have to go through 3 and 4 teams to do it. They only had to get to 1 game. Texas had to get to 1 game, and Texas is gone, and Oklahoma's gone.
Yeah. Well, Texas has been horrible for a while.
Yeah, but they have the ability.
They had the players, but they didn't have the ability, obviously, or they would have made it.
No, but I mean, what I'm talking about the resources.
Oh, I know. The resources and the players the recruits they have, there's no doubt they should have been in national championship game, you know, every other year, it seems like. but they weren't. So apparently they didn't have the ability. So, Oklahoma, on the other hand, had the ability to play offense, but no ability to play defense. And that's what hurt them in playoff games. So I think that the Big 12 is going to be okay. I don't that by far they're not the SEC or Big 10, that's for sure. But I don't think they're as down and out as everybody thinks. I think there's still some really good teams there that are going to compete, that play with a lot of heart, a lot of pride. I think NIL is going to keep a lot of things going. You can sit and say, okay, well, if you're a high 4-star and you've got a choice between Penn State and West Virginia, which one you will choose? Well, okay, you can maybe look at it that way in the past, but now you got to look at it as which one's going to pay more, which one's are going to get more money out of NIL. So, can we compete on that level? Yes. Can other teams in the Big 12? I think so, especially down around Houston, like we're talking about. So I think NIL is going to play a big change there to help these programs be able to compete. But I'm like you. I mean, Georgia, Alabama, Ohio State, Michigan, they're all going to continue to get the big 5-star and high 4-star recruits. Bottom line. But at some point, I feel like the NIL is going to help with things if the NCAA can get it under control. I think it'll even the playing field. Now, but yeah, I agree with you that I was just making the point, and I had typed in the chat down there too. I said, "Oh gosh, he's got my chat up and he's reading stats, so he's going to come back at me here." But I was just really just throwing that out there to play around and have some fun. Just mainly saying, we could have made playoffs in a lot of those years. Would we? Probably not, but we could have. We were good enough, just didn't play it. Now, but this is the SEC show. I wish all the teams great success. I'd love to see Kentucky in playoffs and maybe playing for national championship. I know Drill would like to see that too. I'd like to see Vanderbilt do it. I'd like to see a lot of teams do it. But and I'm not going to say they're not capable of it, because I think every team's capable of it. If you're a Power 5 team, I think you're perfectly capable of it. I think there's a few Group of 5 teams, that are perfectly capable of it. Tulane, you're not going to tell me that Tulane couldn't compete in playoffs. Now, could they win a national championship? Most likely not, but they can compete.
Well, define compete. Okay, if we had a 12-team playoff this year, you're saying that you believe that Tulane could compete,
right,
in a 12-team playoff?
Yes, I think they would have. If we'd had a 12-team playoff and Tulane got in, I think they would have won at least one playoff game and possibly two.
No.
But I think they would have won one at least.
I don't think they're winning one game.
You don't think so?
No, they would have been the 12 seed. They would have played the 5 seed. Are they playing Ohio State?
Okay, well, now wait a minute. Well, now let's think about that, because TCU, right? So TCU got their ass handed to them by Kansas State twice, right?
They lost in overtime.
What Tulane do to Kansas State?
They got their ass handed to them. They lost in overtime.
Okay. What did Tulane do to Kansas State?
They beat Kansas State.
How bad? Do you remember?
By 1 touchdown, 17-10.
And then who else did Tulane beat? Was it USC?
They beat USC in the Cotton Bowl.
Right. So you're telling me they couldn't win one playoff game?
It's possible, but I highly doubt it. I would certainly have put a small fortune against them in a playoff situation. They would have been the 12 seed, and they would have played Ohio State, the 5 seed. That would have been their game, or Tennessee, whoever you want to put there. Alabama,
I'm not.
Ohio State.
I'm not by any means taking up for Tulane. Y'all know that in the chat, I hope, because I'm not looking at the chat and I can imagine what they're saying.
And they had a
I'm not by
remarkable
any means.
season. and Tulane, who was capable of and pulled it off to beat Kansas State and USC. So those are two extremely good wins. They also lost to UCF and somebody else. Maybe they lost to UCF twice. Those might have been their two losses. I thought they lost to somebody worse than that.
A lot of times, and you and I have talked about this, it comes down to the matchups too.
They lost
You
to
know,
Southern Miss.
Yeah. So a lot of times it comes down to matchups too. You know, it's not just necessarily how talented a team is, it's how well a player matches up against another player. So if you've got a strong edge rusher, you know, if I've got a left tackle that can take care of him, well, that kind of takes that edge rush away. That's a great matchup, right? And then if I've got a decent quarterback now, he's able to throw the ball down the field before your edge rusher can get to him. So there's a nice matchup. So sometimes it's just a matchup that makes a difference, and you never know what one team might have to be able to match up with another team. That
So
might be their strength.
So as Antoine is stating here in the chat, if we could magically produce scores that would have happened, and you would have told me that Tulane would win a playoff game, I wouldn't be shocked. Yeah, they had a really good football team, again, that beat Kansas State on the road and beat USC in the Cotton Bowl. They were also only a touchdown. Well, they lost by a touchdown to UCF, and they lost to Southern Miss, and then they beat them in a schedule of American Conference teams, including Houston, in overtime. So they were no juggernaut by any stretch. But could they win a playoff game? Yeah, they could. But I give them about a 10% chance of doing so.
Yeah. I mean, I wouldn't put the chance real high, but still, I'm just saying they could have won a playoff game.
Yeah.
So I think the ball could bounce either way. And when you get to playoffs and you're going to take your top 12 programs in the country, there might be a huge difference between first 1 and 2 and 11 and 12. There might be a huge difference there. But it's just a one-off game at that point. So they just got to win that one game. And the players are going to be hyped up, and it's going to be a good game, and the ball could bounce either way. So to say that a team don't have a chance to win a national championship, especially going to a 12-team playoff, I think is really wrong. Because I think every conference is going to have a chance.
3 or 4 games, Joey.
Well, I realize that, but they're not going to play the top 2 teams in the nation all 3 or 4 of those games.
Eliminated their puncher's chance. The puncher's chance is gone. They get puncher's chance. Oh, that wins them a playoff game. And that's even a long shot.
Okay, but we're not just talking about just Tulane here. You're talking about, so let's just say it's West Virginia, for instance. And let's say West Virginia goes 11-1.
Okay.
And maybe the one loss is in the Big 12 championship game and they lose the Big 12. But they make the playoffs, right?
Yep.
Now you're going to tell me that they're 12th seed and they got to play the number 5 spot. You're going to tell me the number 5 spot that West Virginia wouldn't have a chance to beat them?
No, that's not what I'm saying. I'm talking about winning national championships.
I know that. But I'm saying, okay.
And I've said
now,
the Big 12 is not winning a national championship, and I would put $1,000 on it for the next till 2030 that the Big 12 is not winning a national championship.
But I was thinking that you were looking at it as it would be a puncher's chance for, let's say, a 12 seed West Virginia to beat a 5 seed Ohio State.
No, they've got a better. Okay, this is a really good West Virginia team. Obviously, they've made
Right.
a playoff, and they against whoever the 5 seed is. It's going to be another second place team from the SEC or the Big Ten. Oh, they've got much higher than a puncher's chance. I'd say that's probably a 75-25, 70-30 game. But that's one win.
Right. I understand that. That's one win.
They got to get through 3 more.
Right. I know. I'm not saying that it's going to be a clean sweep, and I'm not saying it's going to be West Virginia. But I'm just saying it could be Oklahoma State or TCU or anybody, right? Now are you going to say the same thing about the ACC? Other than Clemson, there's nobody got a chance.
No, because I see teams that have shown that ability. Nobody in the Big 12 has shown that ability. Florida State's shown that ability. They just won a national championship 8 years ago.
Right. Florida State has. When's the last time Miami won a national championship?
01.
01. So they did it, what, 6 years after BYU?
No, 17 years.
17 years. That's right. 17 years. That's right. 84, they won it. Yeah. So, there's going to be teams in the Big 12 that have competed at a high level, right? You're not saying that.
No, I'm not saying that.
So there's always a shot. I'm not saying we're going to win 3 in 10 years. No. But can we pull off one by 2030? I think so. And I'm not betting you $1,000, but I think it we will. Look, if you think, let's go back to 2014, right? Baylor and TCU got left out of the playoffs.
Yep.
One of them two teams could have easily won the national championship that year. They were both just as good. They were both just as good as Florida State. They were both
Ohio
just
State.
as good.
Ohio State won the national championship.
They were both just as good, though.
No.
You don't think so? Really?
No.
I do.
You think the Baylor team that went and lost to UCF in the Fiesta Bowl? If we looked up the NFL careers of the best players on that Baylor team versus Ohio State, there's no comparison between the talent on those two teams.
Trying to remember exactly who they had. Everybody I'm thinking of was on the 2012 Baylor team, not 2014.
So I remember watching. My impression was, first of all, I felt horrible for Baylor and TCU. I'll put that first and foremost, because even though I thought, well, I didn't know what to think at the time. Maybe Florida State should have been left out, even though they were undefeated. They got blitzkrieged by Oregon in the Rose Bowl. But I thought it was a horrible situation, because I think all of those teams earned a playoff spot. They all had one loss. They should have all been in the playoff. None of them should have been left out. So I know that I've heard from a lot of TCU fans in particular say, well, Ohio State should have been left out. No, they shouldn't have been, but you shouldn't have been left out either. They all earned a playoff spot. But my impression at the time, I remember it extremely well, was watching Alabama and Ohio State play in the Sugar Bowl and thinking, either one of these teams, whoever wins this game is the best team in the country, and they're going to win the national title by 3 touchdowns. And they did.
Well, I just think that I'm hoping and praying I prove you wrong, but I think the Big 12 will be able to compete for players. The facilities in the Big 12 are top notch, just like everywhere else. With your bigger teams, your Power 5 teams that have been there a while, your Oklahoma States, your West Virginias, they've got really great facilities. So they got a lot to offer players there. They've got great NIL collectives, so they got a lot to offer players there. I think they'll compete and be okay. Most teams just need to coach, which hopefully we get after this year. So,
well, after what I just stated, some people may not believe this, but this is complete truth. I hope I'm wrong. I already said that. I hope I'm wrong, because I want college football to be balanced, competitive. I want to see it. I think it's more interesting that way. I thought the 80s and the 90s were more interesting than what's going on now. That's what I would like to see. Now, if I throw the $1,000 on it, then I'll think differently about that. But
yeah, I miss football in the 80s and 90s. I missed when there wasn't, so many bowl games and you knew that all the bowl games were going to be really good games. I miss that because it was tougher to get to a bowl. And if you got to a bowl, you were one of the top 30 or 40 teams in the country, you know, and you knew it was going to be a good game. I miss those. I hate when there's all these little bowls that mean absolutely nothing and stuff. I mean, it's great for college football. I understand that, and it's great for some of these teams to be able to get to some of these bowls. But you know, I miss the days of you know, if you won 6 games, you wasn't getting to a bowl. You know, you had to win 8, 9, 10 games to get to bowls. So
Yeah, it's we're never going to get it back.
No.
So we just have to enjoy the games on the field and hope that it doesn't become just a massive SEC and kind of Big Ten world, but that
Right.
you know the Big Ten or the Big 12 can hang in there. And I think the Big 12. I love what the Big 12 did in getting the 4 schools that they did. And if the Pac-12 is going to disintegrate, then I hope that the Big 12 benefits from that.
Yeah, no, I think
because they can keep
I
up.
think the Pac-12 is okay. I think the Pac-12 is going to be fine and survive. I don't think Big 12 is going to take anybody. Myself, not saying it can't happen, it could, but I don't think it will. But you know, I think if you look top to bottom of conferences, I think the Big 12 is probably one of your better conferences to probably watch football because you're going to see some great games in the Big 12. I think the Pac-12 is kind of top heavy. I think the ACC is kind of top heavy. The SEC is top heavy. The Big 10 is top heavy. The Big 12 is just consistent all the way down through there. You're going to see great games between great teams. And unfortunately, that means that teams get knocked out playoffs and chances to play Big 12 championships because there's so much so everybody's so equal and they're going to be good games.
So Joey, just to finish my point, because I like to be thorough, you know that I just looked it up. So that 2014 Baylor team produced. Are you going to take a guess how many NFL draft picks?
Yeah, I wouldn't guess. I would guess maybe 3. I know that it was RG3, right? They had RG3.
No.
Then
Petty at quarterback.
okay,
Anyway,
perfect.
they had 8 NFL draft picks for the next 4 classes. So that team produced 8 NFL draft picks. Do you know how many Ohio State produced?
Probably 30.
31.
Yeah. So
now that doesn't prove everything. It's just an indicator. That doesn't
right, it is an indicator, you know, and
play the game on the field.
Right, because you know some of them Ohio State players that were taken maybe didn't play in that game, so you know maybe all 8 of the Baylor players played in that game, and only 10 of the Ohio State players played.
10 out of 31.
Yeah. So I'm just saying, you looked at a 4-year span there. So yeah, I just I don't know. I'm not saying that I'm not saying that Ohio State's not a great team, and that but I am saying they're beatable. They're not unbeatable. Just like Michigan, you know, how many people give TCU a chance? Nobody gives TCU a chance, right? Okay, you give them a little. You give them a little chance. You gave them a little chance, though.
I gave them like a 35 or 40% chance.
Right. And then none of us gave them a chance against Georgia, and we were right about that. But you know, I think that you can't judge a book by its cover a lot of times, and this is the case. You couldn't say TCU didn't deserve to play for national championship because they did. They proved that in round 1 of the playoffs, right? So I think that the Big 12 is going to be fine. We'll get a couple of teams in the playoffs, and we'll eventually win a national championship by 2030. I believe it. So, but I'm not taking you up on your bet though. So, all right, Mark, I'm gonna let somebody else call in. Y'all have fun.
I appreciate you being here.
All right, see you later.
Thanks, Joey. So Jason here's laughing at me because he said, "Sure you did," in terms of me saying that TCU had a chance. I'm on record all you have to do is go back, look at the live streams, look at all the conversations. We had Melissa Treebwasser on here. I don't know how many times talking TCU football, Michigan. I said it a zillion times. I'm not going to be surprised in the slightest if TCU wins this game. And I came pretty close to picking them to win the game. And I took the points. I snatched up the points. I didn't even really give that much thought. I said, yeah, I'll take whatever it was, 7.5 points. Absolutely. But I kicked myself in not pulling the trigger, picking them to win, because that was my gut instinct. But I thought, well, it doesn't add up. It doesn't add up physically. But, that game did not surprise me in the slightest. And then as soon as I saw Ohio State was going to show up and play, then I knew that was going to be a great game. And I actually, once that game got rolling, I thought Ohio State was going to win. Now, I picked Georgia to win because I just thought Ohio State was just a big wild card. I didn't know what they were going to do. Jason, Mark is like, yes, I am like that, because Big 12 fans, I'm sorry that you're not going to like this, but you should at least respect. I'm stating, is it the truth? No, it's not the truth, because it's the future, but it's the truth right now that could change. But if it doesn't change, and I don't see a reasonable path for it changing based on everything I just stated about recruiting and money and resources and where these programs have been. So Joey gave us a list of West Virginia seasons that he believes they would have vied for a national championship. And I was certainly prepared to go through each season because I just don't see it. 2007, okay, I'll give him that one. The rest of those years, I don't see it. 1988, I'd have to look at their schedule because, of course, they played in the Fiesta Bowl for the national championship. And unfortunately, Major Harris got hurt in that game. So that was unfortunate that we didn't get to see that fully play out. And so Roger Dodger is letting us know that BYU in 1984. So that might as well be ancient history. That BYU team, do I really need to go into that? Have we not heard enough about BYU in 1984 on this channel? And Todd says, I have some Big Ten bias. I love all the people that claim that I have Big Ten bias, because then the Big Ten fans get mad because they think I have an SEC bias. How many Big Ten people did I have all over me this past season because they thought I had an SEC bias? It used to be better in the days when nobody knew who my team was, because you know what? Nobody could figure it out. Nobody could figure it out. If I had a staff that could look these things up, that would be phenomenal, because I would say, go back like 2 years, 3 years, and look up various live streams and go in the chat, go in the various videos and look at the comments, because people could not figure out who I rooted for. They had no idea. And I had, I don't know how many videos where there would be a string of Ohio State fans that would just be all over me for being an Ohio State hater. And I used to just shake my head and laugh. So, yeah, I think people are seeing a little bit bias that's not there. But you know what? We're all biased when it comes right down to it. We all are. That's impossible to take out of us. So we are all biased. And Jason, thank you so much for the super chat. Yes, I was doing a little bit of that with Joey, but Joey's awesome. And Joey is a friend of mine, and Joey does a remarkable job of helping us here. But no, Baylor and TCU 2014 should have been in the playoffs, should have been given an opportunity. They earned that right but the system would not allow it. Yes, Joey, I know you were in 1993 11-0, and you know what? You should have been playing Nebraska, but no team that is a legitimate 11-0 team that is a national championship caliber team loses by 5 touchdowns in a bowl game. So, yeah, you just went back 30 years to find a team from the Big 12 that so we had to go back 30 years to find a team from the Big 12 that kind of competed for a national championship, but also lost by 5 touchdowns in the Sugar Bowl. So I will be proven wrong by the play on the field when who's it going to be? Oklahoma State wins the national championship or Kansas State wins the national championship? Who's going to win the national championship from the Big 12? Central Florida? I guess they won one in 2017. I guess they would be the most likely candidate, right? Or is Houston going to win the national championship? Or TCU, of course, because they got close last year. They only needed another 9 touchdowns to win that game. Yeah, Daryl, we're gonna archive this. I'm gonna clip off the one segment where I state that the Big 12 will not win a national championship until 2030, and I'm gonna get roasted if they do, and I'm gonna be okay with that. I'm gonna be completely okay with getting roasted when, again, wow, Kansas gonna win the national championship. They almost did in 2007, right? That Kansas team, because I'm doing my national championship reviews here. This is going to be a treat for everyone. I'm sure you're all waiting with bated breath. There it is. Oh, man. Talk about good timing. There's 2007 right there. Working through 2007 right now. Kansas. They're on my radar. They're right. Their best win was Kansas's best win in going 12-1, and by argument's sake, having a national championship caliber contending team, that Kansas team, their best win in the regular season was against 7-6 Oklahoma State. That was their best win. They lost to Mizzou. They did not have to play Oklahoma, Texas, or Texas Tech. So anyway, this is going to be available at some point. I'm going to start cranking out these videos. We are, to Chris Foot's angst, because he doesn't like this, that I am reassigning national championships. I'm sorry. College football has screwed it up for way too long. There are too many screwed up national championships that have not been earned, or other teams earned them. Yes, Corey, 2007. There could be 5 national champions for 2007. There really could be 5 national champions. And you know what, Joey? I got West Virginia included. See, down at the bottom there, national championship. LSU, Kansas, West Virginia, USC, Georgia deserved a shot. Now, what that means is Hawaii was undefeated. Was Hawaii going to win a national championship? Of course not. But they went 12-0 in the regular season, and they deserved a shot to play for a national championship. I'm not giving or awarding Hawaii with a national championship in 2007. But those gems we will get to sometime after spring practice. So April, we're going to be here every Saturday, and we are going to go just full throttle on the spring games. Then May comes, and listen to this. May is going to be Great Debate Month. The month of May is going to be the Great Debate Month here at the Voice of College Football. So if you have a debate that you would like to see me debate with someone else or a group of individuals, we will take it on. Whether that's the Miami Notre Dame 1988 controversial touchdown call that swung the national championship race, or that's the infamous Ohio State non-pass interference call against Miami in the 2003 Fiesta Bowl. Whatever your great debate is, let us have it. And don't throw it in the chat right now because I won't see it. So send that to me. Just comment to one of the videos. You guys obviously didn't like my last couple of videos, so we'll stop doing those videos, and we'll start talking about realignment every day. All right. Appreciate everybody being here. Yes, May is the Great Debate Month here at the Voice of College Football. Stay tuned for that, and we are going to make that happen. I already set one up for this. I know that Clemson and Ohio State do not have a lot of love lost between those two fan bases. So there's one right there. All right, folks, we will see you soon. That means at 5:30 Eastern on the Iowa channel for the Hawkeyes live show. 5:30 Eastern. See you then.